We're going to get started. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Amali, and I am the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic. So before we get started, I just have a few logistics to point out about how tonight's going to go. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at this event. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the event, so please start thinking of questions to ask. After the talk tonight, Angela will be signing and personalizing books at the desk near the side door behind me. We also have additional books available to purchase at the front where you checked in. And of course, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of Essential Labor online using the link in the live stream description. All right, so with all that in mind, we are so very excited to introduce Angela Garbes and Jessica Grose, who are here celebrating the release of Angela's newest book, Essential Labor, Mothering as Social Change. In Essential Labor, Angela examines our society and the increasingly important role that caregivers play, whether they are mothers, healthcare workers, or oftentimes both. Drawing from both personal context as a first-generation Filipino American and global context as a woman dealing with motherhood during a global pandemic, Angela reminds us of the true, irrefutable power of mothers and caregivers and explores the radical nature of motherhood. Angela Garbes is the author of Essential Labor and Like a Mother, an NPR Best Book of the Year and finalist for the Washington State Book Award in Nonfiction. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The Cut, New York, Bon Appetit, and featured on NPR's Fresh Air. She also co-hosts The Double Shift, an acclaimed podcast challenging the status quo of motherhood in America. She lives with her family in Seattle. And as I mentioned earlier, Jessica Grose joins Angela in conversation tonight. Jessica is an opinion writer at the New York Times and writes a popular newsletter on parenting. She also writes about women's health, culture, politics, and grizzly bears. She was named a Glamour Game Changer in 2020 for her coverage of parenting in the pandemic. She is the author of the novels Soulmates and Sad Desk Salad. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Business Week, Elle, Cosmopolitan, and many other publications. And she lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughters. So without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Angela and Jessica.
Thank you all so much for being here. I do not take it for granted that I get to have a book launch on my publication day. I know so many people, so many friends of mine and authors have not been able to do it, so it's really, I feel overwhelmed, sorry, with emotion. Sorry, I had a mic, but I guess that's not the mic for this. I see so many loved ones, and it's just wonderful to have you all here, and I want to thank Jess, who is my editor and my friend, for doing this with me. Because it's my pub day and it's my event, and I spent a really long time losing my mind writing my book, I'm going to read from the book. So I'm not going to introduce it that much. So the second half, the first half is a history of caretaking in America, a very personal version of that, and the second half is more forward thinking about how the ways in which, how do I want to mother my children? And when you have to think about that, you have to think about how you were mothered and also possibly how you need to mother yourself to kind of get your game together. So this is actually if I had to pick, I'd say this is my favorite chapter. And I'm just going to read a short selection from this, which is called Mothering as Encouraging Appetites. As a kid, I padded into our yellow linoleum kitchen at all hours to take scoops of rice from the rice cooker that lived on the counter. I'd fill a bowl, then pour patis and lemon juice over it, or soy sauce and lemon juice, and eat it while sitting on the floor. My brothers used to yell at me for what they considered my highest crime, worse than being a tattletale. I'd beat them to a loaf of supermarket bakery French bread and dig out the squishy insides, which I'd chase with a shot of pickle juice straight from the jar. When they opened the paper bag, they'd find only a long, hollowed-out crust. I'd help myself to slices of Pepperidge Farm German chocolate cake, which my mom kept in its box in the freezer. I liked how after eating approximately half the slices, the box had enough room to store the knife inside of it, where it would get finger-numbingly cold. My appetite has always felt outsized, and I've only ever wanted to indulge it. Growing up, I noticed the food we ate was the product of a lot of work. Not only did it require ingredients that most people around me had never heard of, but those ingredients took a long time to cook. I was a small-town 80s kid, growing up at a time when the ethnic aisle in the grocery store was stocked with little more than La Choy brand soy sauce and canned water chestnuts. I could never imagine I'd live where I live now, shopping at Fu Li, Seafood City, Via Owajimaya, 99 Ranch, and H Mart. Many pantry staples, fish sauce, 50-pound bags of rice, bagaong, satonghong noodles, cane vinegar, were procured in Chinatown when we visited my Tita Fe in New York City. I remember my dad loading the hefty woven sacks of rice into the back of our van. When he arrived home, he would cut open the sack with a steak knife, flip it over, and pour its contents into our green rice dispenser, a 3-foot-tall item I was oddly proud of us owning. It dispensed rice in 3-cup increments with just the push of a button. We also ate a fair amount of canned corned beef in those days, but all the important food, the food my parents liked the most, the food we ate on special occasions, or the nights when my mom was home from work early, was Filipino. Pinakbet, munggo, adobo, dishes that required time to poach and shred chicken, braise pork belly, or chop a small mountain of vegetables. For bulalo and sinigang and kare-kare, we needed hours to braise pork neck bones and oxtails. When she made lumpia and pancit, typically for parties and gatherings, my mother would pull out gallon containers of Wesson oil and 2 electric woks and turn what seemed like laundry baskets of noodles using all her arm strength. Instead of our usual white 6-cup rice cooker, she'd get out the fancy cream-colored 10-cupper with the built-in lid and decorative pastel flowers. On these occasions, I often ate so much that I got a stomachache. At age 44, it's not so different. I always want another bite, another serving, another round. At my home now, our oldest daughter loves chili, the bean and beef-filled one her father makes in the slow cooker, suffusing the house with the scent of cumin. She has been known to house 3 consecutive bowls, topped with shredded cheddar, diced onions, crushed tortilla chips, and sour cream in one sitting. On more than one occasion, she has excused herself after one bowl to run to the bathroom and poop, ensuring she has room for another serving. I resist the urge to tease her about it, because honestly, I get it. For a long time, I thought of my body as very inconvenient. Not necessarily fat, but definitely a little too much. A little too brown, a little too round, my calf muscles large, skinny jeans tight around them, decidedly indelicate. My mother commented that I was big-boned. Compared to her delicate wrists, which I could loop my fingers around, my joints were thicker. Where did I come from? Since the moment Lagaya was born, this is my younger daughter who's 4, people have been telling me that she looks just like me. Your twin, more than a few people have remarked. To me, she looks like herself, but 4 years in, I can finally concede that there is a strong resemblance between us. Why was I hesitant to admit it? As Lagaya grows into her own person, I see that her face looks very much like mine, but also that her body shape seems to echo mine. I don't think she'll be tall, but she will be robust and sturdy, her legs short and strong. I've never wanted to give voice to the resemblance for fear that it will curse her, to have the same baggage and body image issues I've struggled with. Self-conscious about her round stomach, thick calves, big boobs. I have curiosity too. Will she, like me, have uneven body hair? Her right armpit hairy and her left scattered with just a few thin wisps? Will her leg hair grow only to the middle of her shins, as though she's wearing hairy mid-calf length socks? Will her lips stay plump and delicious? And will she retain the same expressive face that makes it nearly impossible to hide her emotions? Everyone has their own innate understanding of how to be in their bodies, including my daughters. I am trying my best to stay back, to find the delicate place where my fears exist and where they become projections I put on my children. I keep my eye out for that line so I don't cross it. I'm figuring out how to release control, follow their lead. I want to get out of their singular life paths, but I want to get in the way of the dominant narrative, box it out. How do you care and lead and recede at the same time? Can I inspire my girls to not care what their stomachs are shaped like? To know that they are much more than their bodies? To pursue their appetites, and in the words of Carmen Maria Machado, manifest the audacity of space-taking? Can I give them what Machado calls fatness of the mind?
Thanks.
Am I going to keep talking into this, or should I put it down?
Oh, yeah.
Keep talking into it. Okay. And you? Okay, there.
I have one. Yes.
It's just confusing because C-SPAN's here, and, so we are also mic'd. So it was a little bit. Yeah.
I hope we scandalize C-SPAN. That's my one goal.
Yes, let's. That's our goal.
That was really lovely. I'm so happy to be here. I wanted to start with how the idea of this book came about, because it's your second that kind of circles around motherhood.
Yeah.
And how you managed to write it during the pandemic. Which,
Yeah.
as we all know, was not the easiest
It was never guaranteed. Just
No.
need to say that. I never felt like it was like definitely going to happen. So I was actually under contract to write a second book. My first book came out in 2018, and because I didn't know what I was doing and I had like no platform and no audience, I was like, when it started to sell a little bit and when I was on Fresh Air, I was like, oh, like they might let me publish another book. But I kind of grew up always with this like scarcity mindset, so I was like, I better think of another book fast because in a year they won't remember who I am.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just need to like grab it. And I was also, I should say, like postpartum, like 4 months postpartum, and was just like, let me just empty myself until I'm a husk. And like that seemed like the right thing to be doing. It just seemed natural.
Sure.
So I like pitched this book. I mean, it's relatable, right?
Yeah, fully.
So that was kind of how it started. And I was like, I don't want to, my background is writing about food. I was like, I never thought that I would write a book about motherhood. And I was like, I don't want to write another one, not because it's not interesting to me, but because the market thinks it's niche, right? Like anything with like women's things like over here. And it's just, and I felt like I wanted to not be pigeonholed. So I was trying to write this book and it wasn't going well. And then the pandemic happened. And then my children were just home with me for like 4 months straight. I was with them 24/7. And I mean, it only took a month for me to realize there's no way I'm going to meet my deadline of July 2020. So I like have a very understanding editor, and she said, yeah, I mean, I was joking to my husband that I'm going to have to quit my job because I can't do it all. So we like pushed it back basically in the end by a year. And, one of the seeds was that I was like at the beginning of the pandemic, I was feeling frustrated because I couldn't write it all. And I was like, I'm only a caretaker. I'm not a creative person anymore. And, I'm watching the news and we're talking about essential workers and healthcare workers, sanitation workers, transportation workers. And I'm like, yes, they are totally essential. And then I was like, what about moms? What about parents? Like, what about caregivers? Like, I feel pretty essential right now.
Right.
And no one is talking about us. And I know you know this. And so that was always in my head and wrestling with that kind of stuff. And then because I'm like lucky, I had the chance to write a piece for New York Magazine in The Cut. And it was all about like all of my bad feelings in the last year and like how, we have 2 million less women in the professional workforce than we did from the start of the pandemic. And so it was just like me processing my trauma of the last year. And then, but it was wildly relatable. So it did some lips. Elizabeth Warren like tweeted it out. And then I was like, I think I'm onto something here. And so I talked to my agent and I like wrote a new proposal, and then both my agent and my editor were like, go where you feel inspired.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. And then, I wrote the book in 7 months. which is like
That is fast.
after like a year of not writing.
Yeah.
And the like, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I think that's fine.
It's your night.
Yeah.
Stand up here and this monologue.
But there are two main ways that I got the book done. The first one is I have to really shout out my husband, Will, who, as soon as I signed my contract in April of 2021, like pulled up to my desk and said, pull up your Google Calendar right now. You are never going to write this book if you don't get away from us. And so for the next 6 months, every 3 weeks, you're going to go away. And you're going to go away for a minimum of like 3 or 4 days, and you can go away for up to a week. And I'm telling you, like, I got it. Don't worry about it. And yeah. And so I was like, oh, that's so nice, but I think you're overreacting. Like, I don't think we need to do that. And he was like, no, we're doing it right now. And then I was like, yes, Daddy. Whatever you say. And so that's how I did it. And so I like Airbnb'd, I like stayed in hotels, I house sat, I like stayed in places where I was peeing in a bucket outside. Like, and it was great. I just got to go and like be accountable to no one.
Yeah.
To like get lost in the work, and it was so great. And I found like sometimes I would come back early because I knew if I stayed a full week I wouldn't want to come back, to be honest. Like yeah, so that was like the one part of it, like was space and time. And then the other thing I did was I just let go of perfectionism, which is very hard for me. I am a double Virgo, and I always like line edit as I write. And I just was like, I just need to vomit words, because like if something is in my head, it can be brilliant, but I can't do anything with it. So I did that Jamie Attenberg 1,000 Words of Summer, which I encourage people to use, and I know a lot of people do. And then I actually just kept going. And I was like, I'm just going to write. I just need content. And I didn't think about like what chapter it would go in. It was just ideas that I had. And then I did that for like 4 or 6 weeks. And then I had tens of thousands of words. And then I just revised. And that was never something that was a deeply part of my process like that. But yeah, so I sort of reimagined my whole creative process, and I escaped from my family.
Oh, two very good tips. So, I mean, that is a good segue into the next question, which is, how did you end up deciding to structure it the way that you did? So, you know, most of you probably haven't read it. It is arranged by shorter chapters, each sort of around a theme. And the chapter you read was a great example of that. So, I think actually that was the one Mothering as Encouraging Appetites. So, tell us more about how you ended up arranging it that way.
Yeah, I would like to shout out editors and my own editor, Julie Will, who edited my first book. I turned in a proposal that was like, la la la, I'm an essayist. And like, I just like jump around and I'm mixing in history and personal narrative. And she was like, I love this book, I believe in it. She was like, girl, you need a narrative arc. So she like said, like, you should have like the first half of the book be a history of caretaking in America and kind of how we got to this place in the pandemic, you know, and where we're in a childcare crisis, which, I mean, we've been in a childcare crisis for years. And she was like, and then the second half of the book can be more forward-looking, like that sort of like imagining like a future and what mothering can do moving forward. So that was really, it was the structure that she gave me. And then I sort of like rearranged in that way. And then in terms of like the themes for the second half of the book, like it was I was thinking about like what are the most basic things that I want to teach my kids. And I mean, to boil it down, I think it's really about like interdependence, which is that we need each other. And also about, you know, believing in your own inherent worthiness and everything about that, like mentally, physically, emotionally. And so I would say those are kind of like the main themes. Yeah.
I mean, part of the book that touched me in particular, and you get at it a little bit in what you read, was the parts about the deep history about your family, the deep history of Filipinos coming to the United States. Tell me about writing that. I know that was emotionally wrenching, as writing about one's family often is. I've done it. It's not the most fun, although worth it. So tell me about the sort of the decision to weave that story in and what it says about caretaking in America, caretaking in the world.
Yeah, so I've done a couple of interviews where I've told people and they've all been like, what? Because I said, like, the proposal had nothing about my Filipino-American family. Like, I was not setting out to do that. I mean, I knew that I would write about, like, my life, but I wasn't going to be like, let's dig deep into the 1965 Immigration Act. You know, like, I wasn't thinking about colonial capitalism, like, that deeply. I mean, I've been thinking about it my whole life, but not, like, in this book. I mean, now it's funny, I can look back and be like, this is so clearly the book I've been wanting to write for so long. It's funny how that happens. But really, like, so when Julie gave me my marching orders, I was like, all right, here I am. I'm going to write a history of caretaking in America. And then I was like, how am I going to write a history of caretaking in America? And so I was like, obviously, like, the number one thing I think you have to reckon with if you're going to do that is you have to talk about slavery. You know, we like built the wealth of this country by treating people like as property, and deciding that they were not fully human. And I was like, I don't know if I'm the best person to tell this story. Like, I think I can be sensitive and really be rigorous in my research, but I was struggling. And then I saw this statistic. And so, as Jess mentioned, my mom is a nurse who came over after the 1965 Immigration Act. There's a whole wave. The U.S. lowered quotas and for highly skilled immigrants. And because my parents, because the Philippines was an American colony for 50 years, which we don't really talk about, they were educated. I mean, the whole idea was Americans were like, this is the white man's burden that Rudyard Kipling wrote about, right? This is sanitizing little brown brothers, people who are inherently backwards and diseased and dirty. And so they gave them an American education system where everyone was taught English, and then they established medical schools and nursing schools, and it was a way of cleaning up the population. And then when there was a nursing shortage in the United States after World War II, it was very convenient to allow them to come in after they had not been allowed to come in. So that's sort of that history. But the statistic for me that like just everything got like just crystallized was that Filipinx nurses are 4% of the workforce in the United States, and they're 34% of nursing COVID deaths. Wow. And yeah, whoever said wow, yeah. I mean, I get really emotional when I think about that because I was like, this is my mom. Like, this is so many people I love. This is my family, and it's just so clear. I mean, we all came to understand it in different ways during the pandemic, but like people of color, we don't, we think they're dispensable, and we're like okay with them dying, you know, and our lives are not seen as important as white people. And so that's when I was like, oh, this is the story that I want to tell. Mm-hmm. And yeah, my family is not, my ancestors are not enslaved. My ancestors are not Latinx who like do the majority of like domestic work and house cleaning in a lot of areas. But my family is touched by like American empire and colonialism and capitalism and white supremacy, and it's all the same forces. Mm-hmm. And so that was really like, I was like, I can tell this story. And it's a story that too, I think is underrepresented. And the process of writing it though, and we have talked about this, because, so I had to kind of overcome this idea that it wouldn't be that interesting to people. Mm-hmm. And that's like internalized whiteness, obviously. But it was also in the process, I was like, oh, this is really hard. It's like really emotionally wrenching. And I'm interviewing my parents, and it's really like, I'm not sure they're getting what I'm trying to do, and there's so much miscommunication. But I'm glad that I did it. And I was also it was amazing the amount of Filipino American scholarship that was out there that I did not realize existed. And so that was really beautiful to be welcomed into that and to find myself in this really rich landscape of research and writing. Yeah. But what surprised me, so you read a really early version of it, and you told me that that's what resonated the most with you, and you were like, I wondered if you could talk about like why it did that, because it was a complete surprise to me, and it was also like incredibly powerful.
So I really identified with it just sort of as a family story, because I think many of us were, grandchildren of immigrants who came to this country not necessarily because they wanted to, but because the whole Hitler thing, which we know, not great. And I'm also the child of many generations of doctors. And so I think there's a way in which, it's a cliche, United States is a nation of immigrants. Mm-hmm. I think that there's echoes of sort of that weight of history that you might not even articulate to yourself, because I don't think about it every single day. I had been thinking about it, and I still haven't been able to write about it a lot last summer, because myself and my daughters applied for Austrian citizenship, because Austria just passed a law that said any direct descendants of Holocaust survivors could get dual citizenship without stepping foot in the country. And we decided to do it. We did it. But I still can't explain to myself or to my children what it means to willingly go become citizens of a country that murdered a lot of your family.
Yeah.
And it's not funny. I laugh because I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, and so, like, you know, I think there's I would guess the majority of people in the United States have some sort of family history that, while not identical to the struggles of your family, is something that lingers in the back of their heads and is so intimately wrapped up in who they are, what position they, you know, take in their own families, that sort of stretching back of generations. And I don't know if it's, you know, we both have 2 daughters. You think of your daughters as potentially mothers someday. It's just very sticky.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I found the way that you spoke about it just, you know, again, another cliche that's sometimes really specific individual stories can be the most universal, because those are feelings and thoughts about your own personal history and how we got here or wherever we are in the world that I think just are so incredibly universal, and you told them so well. So I was incredibly moved.
Thanks. Yeah, and I mean, when you reached out to me, this is all like an Instagram DM.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Best mode of communication.
I was like, it didn't occur to me, because I know logically, like as a writer, like the more specific you get, the more universal it gets. But then when you're like, but I have to write about me, like I have to write about my mom, like I have to dig into that, and it's, I don't know, but I think it's a really great point about in America, like, you know, even people who are like quote unquote white, you know what I mean? The definition of white was like, it did not include Italian people, right? It did not include Irish people at some point.
Yeah.
And so there's all of that, like we've all been touched by that sort of like empire and the colonialism and all of those kinds of things are all white supremacy. Like I think it's powerful to think about it that way. And when you said that to me, I felt really like it was like this exhale, because it wasn't something I anticipated. And then coming from you, and then when you shared your family story, I was like it meant so much to me. And then it was also like, okay, it was also worth it. You know, so like all of this, like, because it wasn't easy to write, you know, it was really, and to say, you know, because it's dealing with like all of the opportunities in my life, including sitting here and talking about like white supremacy and how we have to undo capitalism and the colonial mentality. Like I get to do this because my parents like submitted to these forces to a certain extent, you know, who they like gave up something. And so that's like a really, like try talking about that with your family. You know, it's like, I think it's harder than talking to your racist uncle at Thanksgiving, you know, or whatever we're all supposed to be doing.
Yeah, but I do think that there's like a fantasy that we have that we're supposed to resolve it. You know, like our feelings forever about these very deep and complicated and difficult things are not just like, well, I talked about it that one time and now it's done.
Right.
You know, wrap it up in a bow and put it in a box and it's over. Like it's like that's life.
Like we're just gonna keep talking about it and talking about it. I remember when I was working on the book and I was talking to my therapist, and you know, so I like log in. This is all on Zoom, and so I was like, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, like, am I ever gonna be able to not care like what my mom thinks and if she gets what I'm trying to do? And she just goes, I don't know. Are you? And I was like, okay, I guess we're done here. But that's the thing. It's like I feel like I just have to, and I can't walk away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's
and like,
peak shrink though. That's like a real, you got shrunk.
I know. I was like, all right, well, I've just been read completely and hard owned by my therapist. Okay. Like, and that's the thing is like, I just keep coming back. I keep coming back to these terrible conversations. I keep coming back to these. It's worth it. I feel like this is the work of like my life. Yeah. But it is, and it's not always hard, but it leaves you raw. Yeah. But it does feel, I don't know. I have to keep trying. I've like said this in an interview recently, and it's really true. Like honestly, I think I'm a writer because I'm just desperately trying to explain myself to my parents, and just to be like legible to them. Like because I think there's this big cultural divide where they love me unconditionally, but like they don't really know. They don't really get what I do in some ways, and I think like they're so supportive, but I feel like we just remain slightly illegible to each other, and so I'm just like. I just can't stop trying. I just love them.
Well, in addition to that set of revelations, was there anything else that in the research or the reporting that really surprised you, in a good way?
In a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a positive way.
The wonderful thing that I knew about, like I was familiar with Black feminism, right, and intersectional feminism, which is, Kimberly Crenshaw gave us that term, but like intersectional feminism is what like women of color and indigenous people have been doing for a really long time. And so, I was schooled in like feminism in America is like Betty Friedan, is like burning your bra, is like, it's white mainstream feminism. And it was really such a pleasure to like spend time in the history of like the National Welfare Rights Organizing Project, people like Johnny Tillman, and then Wages for Housework, like Selma James and Sylvia Federici. And these very people, I can't believe we haven't taken these ideas yet. Like 60 years ago, people were like, so capitalism's bad, right? And like, if we were to take that out, like we would solve a lot of problems, and also what's good for everyone. Like these are people who were like poor and oppressed in America, and the solution they came up with was like give everybody an income. Like they were always reaching for the collective, and what's best for everyone is what's best for this country. And we don't hear that feminism. We are not taught that. I think I had to like seek it out, and so it was wonderful. It was infuriating in some ways, right? But it was really wonderful to spend time in the company of these organizers and thinkers, and that sort of generosity and community.
Yeah, it sounds lovely. So one thing that I think a lot about, and that I think your book deals with really well, is motherhood as an identity. And being a mother is one of the most important ways that I feel like I identify myself, and yet I absolutely bristle at basically every way that mom is constructed in American culture. Yes. And I think that's a theme that both our books share. So I just would love to hear you talk a bit more about how motherhood is a part of who you are, and how that sort of pushes against how it is pushed on you. Do you understand? Like, does that make sense?
Totally. And this is one of those questions where I'm like, well, just get ready, because I think you might have more interesting things than me to say about this.
I think about it a lot. I really do.
I feel like I love your work because I think this is what you're wrestling with, you know? And I feel like you're doing it in a way that is like engaging, and you're doing it on a regular basis, you know?
Too regular.
I feel like...
you asked me, but yeah.
My main thing is that we talk about motherhood really as like, we talk about it in lifestyle terms.
Yes.
Right? Like as though the carrier or the pouch of food that you buy is somehow going to like lead to like significant cultural advantages, or like who your child is, right? And so we spend all of this time talking about like what you can buy and the things that you can consume, and like the choices that you can make, right? When really, it's an issue of resources, and it's just a distraction to me from like motherhood is not a lifestyle, it's life. Right? And it's actually not just life, and this is why I'm also moving towards mothering as a verb, because motherhood as a noun is like static, and like mothering as a verb like gets to the repetitive, the infinitely repetitive tasks and the millions of small actions that like make up a day, that make up a year, that make up a life. And to me, it's like I'm just like a body in action. And so I want to talk about mothering as living, you know, as like what we're doing every day.
Yeah.
And so it's all this sort of stuff. Like I get asked questions about like momfluencers, and I'm like, I got nothing, guys. Like I just like don't have that, you know. And like mother, then the other thing that's interesting is like mother is such a limited term. I got a lot of really interesting feedback after my first book, and I took it to heart, where people were like, your book's really important to me, but I feel like you really rely on gendered terms, and I don't feel included in that. And I was like, fair, you know, like I feel like I'm still learning. And so this is also my attempt to like, also raising children is a social responsibility. It's not like just like an individual family. So I'm trying to like, I don't know, like mother is an important part of my identity, but I don't want to like, what it is to me is personal. And so I don't need to like, that to me is not like I'm not trying to center that in a cultural conversation around motherhood, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I do think that that's something that is often lost, is the intimacy of it. And to me, I think of it mostly as the dynamics between the 4 human beings who live in my household,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just smaller people and bigger people.
Right.
And those smaller people have less control over what goes on, but they still have their own sort of specific personalities, and sort of interacting with them every single day, and making sure they have what they need.
Yeah.
Like, that's the important part of it to me, and all the rest is just noise.
Yeah.
But there's just so much noise.
Yeah, but so
There's
that's
just,
but
a lot.
so your job requires you though to be like, okay, I think this is not something that's maybe that interesting, or like,
Right.
well, not interesting. I mean, everything can be interesting, right? If you find the right way into it. But like your job like forces you to like deal in the things that you bristle against.
Yes.
So I wondered, can you talk about that?
Oh, I mean, I'm just like enraged 40% of the time. I think for me, it's just being observant. Being observant, commenting on the culture that we marinate in, and that seems to be beyond, like, not worthy of comment, or just accepted as, oh, that's just how it is, or
Right.
someone is just this way, or this is just how we are supposed to be, and to sort of just hold it up and say it doesn't have to be this way, or why is it this way. I think it's a lot of explaining why things are the way they are historically and culturally, which I think you do a great job.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's what we have in common.
Yeah. I think it is time to open it up to questions in the audience. So, does anyone? Don't be shy.
Oh no, I don't even like.
It's for
It's for
It's for
C-SPAN.
C-SPAN. Yeah.
How do you not stay angry all the time? I think part of, like, I read your first book, you know,
Yeah.
in a couple nights
Yeah.
on my phone with a 1-month-old on my body, and I just was like, fuck this, like this.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful and it resonated, and you know that. But how do you not stay angry all the time? I think these structures are not set up for our success, right? Like, it's impossible to do this well. Somehow it feels,
Yeah.
but yet we have to.
Yeah. Did everyone hear the question? Okay. So, as someone who has struggled her whole life with anger issues, I have to say that it's hard. It's been hard. But something happened for me like a few years ago, and I think it was like being destroyed by 2 children, right? And having very little energy, but truly, like, anger takes so much energy. And like I only have like a certain amount of energy, and I can't say this word, like there's a number of that I have in one day. And sometimes they're gone at like 10 a.m. And I don't have like that energy, like the anger really like drains me. And so I've had to try to figure out like, it's like, energy can never die. It gets like transformed into other things. So this is like, I think about this, and I think I've thought about how to like, what is it, like transmute it, right? Or like sublimate it into something else. And I have to say that one of the things that happened at the beginning of the pandemic is that I read Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong, which is like, I mean, it is just like a monument to anger, right? In the best way. But I felt like here's someone who has taken her anger and accepted it as part of like her perspective and just sharpened it into like this tool that's just like eviscerating systems and every idea that we have. And I was like, I want to do that. And like I'm not saying that I'm doing what she's doing, but I've just found a way. Like I don't try. I'm angry a lot, but I don't try to suppress it. I try to like turn it into something that feels productive, that feels like healthy for me, and because it's not great for my kids to see me angry either, And then the other thing is like, I think also in the pandemic, I'm just like, I need to get my life, right? Like I cannot, like, I've been cooped up. I have not been able to touch anyone. I felt so like, and this is a big part of the book is like, it's really like about pleasure. And like, this is our birthright as human beings. And like, I will not let anger and a system that forces me into this position, like rob me of like the like richness of life and like being like a very like sensate, like feeling person, like, and who gets to like have fun, like I just refuse. And so that's what I do. And it doesn't work every day.
I wonder if you have any like ideas or strategies for like turning your caretaking mom brain of mush into thinking creatively and actually putting like fingers to keyboard or pen to paper, and especially when you might not have a partner who will like block out your Google Cal for you. And
But that's what we all deserve, by the way.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah, agreed. But maybe we don't know.
Yeah, no. I'm just saying though, like I think it's no, I mean that's honestly like that's the question. I don't. This was a very specific circumstance, you know what I mean? And like I think things were kind of chill on his like work end for a while. Like we couldn't have done that at the beginning of the year. Like it wouldn't have worked. So I think it's sort of knowing when the capacity is there. I think there's also like part of writing and being creative is living, and it's okay, like honestly, to have like fallow periods, right? Because your brain feels like mush, but you're still you and you're still thinking about stuff. And so I guess on some level I'd be like, whatever you can do to get a thought down, whatever you can do to get an idea down, if it's like a voice memo to yourself, right? Or I don't know, I just feel like maybe it's something like touching that part of you that's creative, like touching it like just like for like a minute a day, like nurturing that, because you can't just like force it, you know, like, but it's like coaxing it back and like letting it come into your life in a pace that feels right. I think it's really hard when we put the pressure on ourselves to be like, now I'm gonna write, like now I'm gonna move into my like I'm gonna start crafting, right? Like, and I feel like if we make it like it's like we make it another goal, but it should be something that's like, you know, there's this poet Yanyi. I don't know if you guys know Yanyi. But I subscribe to his newsletter, and well, I don't pay, sorry, but like there was one that came out, and I will one day again. But I have a Yanyi quote on my wall that it's like, in a world that expects like, well, now I'm gonna mess it up, but it's basically like, let your creativity and your art and your practice be like a garden that you expect nothing from, but that you just nurture, you know. And then I think if you release yourself from expectation, maybe that helps.
I have one practical bit of advice, which is just like I'm contractually obligated to write twice a week, so whether it's good or not, it's coming out to you. Whenever I'm blocked, I start writing in an email as if to a friend. Because then the stakes are extremely low. You are just trying to explain it in plain language that someone who loves you is going to read, so that's like a very important part, because I think, and you have talked about this too, you know, it's just you can really get in your head and be editing as you're writing, and I think that there's something, at least for me, that is very freeing about just like, I'm just gonna write this in an email to a friend, who cares? Like, so that's one way that I kind of like...
Yeah, the last thing any of us need is another obligation.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Anne.
Hi. For you. What I also love about your writing, and with the first book you did this too, but you talk about, and you mentioned, you know, collectivism, right? And how there's so many amazing social justice movements that actually integrate motherhood as a part of, you know, I just keep thinking about how motherhood is weaponized by politicians, and so a lot of justice movements now have to, you know, re-weaponize it or sort of reverse weaponize it, or kind of negate it or take gravity out of it. But are you finding it, did you find in your research any particular movements or some new ways of approaching it that are maybe just, you know, treating it with a little more, you know, just treating it with the respect that it deserves? Because I do find that in a lot of the justice rhetoric, sometimes it's like, you know, like abolish the family is a phrase I hear a lot, right? So like, what do you think of that sort of?
Yeah. Did everyone hear that question? Okay. I mean, I love this question because it's like how do we get past this idea of like violence, right? Of like force being the thing that is like best, right? Like, or like I've even said like, mothers are on the front lines. I'm like, of what? You know? And I mean, I thought that to myself the other day, but the thing that I found was there's a great, I can't remember the name of the paper or the article, but it's by Patricia Hill Collins. And so this is Black feminism, but she cites Barbara Christian, and they're talking about, so like it's really just getting back to like how we lived for thousands of years around the world, right? Globally, it's like that collectivity. But so Barbara Christian writes something like about how in Africa, right, like she's saying that we should really just abandon capitalism and the nuclear family, duh. But how, you know, the home was not ever like, it was villaging, like the home was never the province of women, and men were not expected to be solely financially responsible for supporting a family. Like everything was done in this shared way. And the quote is something like, there's no doubt that for like many African women that motherhood is a site of creativity and continuity, and I'm messing it up a little bit, but to me it's really just getting back in touch with that, like, you know, you were talking about how like your creative brain feels dead, right? But also like your brain feels like mush, but like when you're figuring out things like with children, like that's like you're like putting creativity into practice. And so I that's the thing that makes me think of is like, it's just challenging ourselves to see this as like, yeah, like we all feel like we're prepared for battle because we've all been living like, you know, because our government feels like it's okay for us to die, right? Like, so we're all like in this heightened state, but like cultivating that creativity, being part of like a lineage, being part of like, that's human history. That's what mothering is, right? Like it is not, I don't know, it's hard when you feel like you're under attack in many ways, but there is, I'll send it to you. But yeah, but it really struck me because I was like, it's part of like, it's like ingenuity. It just freed me up from thinking like, it just opened my eyes to like, this is a totally different framing, and that's how many people regarded it for centuries. Like that sort, I mean, violence has always been here, but like, I don't know, there's this, it felt like the opposite of that, like of what you're talking about. We can talk about it over a drink later.
So you talk about going away for several days at a time over an extended period of time. You're home with your family, you're going away to write. Home with your family, going away to write. I'm curious if in that kind of whiplashy mode there were any moments of reckoning for you where you came home with a like, we've got to talk or we've got to change because of something you discovered in your research or in your thinking that then you had to bring home in practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love it because it's true. It's like, you know, my husband, he's everything good and he did do the Google Calendar thing. But you know, honestly, I have to say, like, ever since the election of after Donald Trump was elected president, there was some stuff that was like, it was like an earthquake and stuff started coming out of the ground. Like, my husband's white. And like, I mean, he's a labor organizer, right? So he's very progressive and he's like, you know, the last person in the room to want to take up space. Like, and so I always was like, oh, we have like that in common. But then I was like, you didn't, like the day after Donald Trump was elected, I was like, should we get a gun? I mean, I was like, this is scary, but like, do we need to get a gun? And then I also was like, so, I only had one child at the time, and I was like, so my Noli could pass for white. So I was like, if it comes down to it, you will take Noli, and you will live as white people. And like, I will find like, you know, and I mean, it sounds really dramatic, and that was his reaction. But like, I can feel this in my body, and it surprised me, but like, that's where my mind went. And he was like, I think you're overreacting. And I was like, I don't think you understand the extent to which I wish I wasn't, right? And so that's been sort of like this undoing of like who he is in the world and the space he occupies and like how I see the world. And I think a lot of that research and that sort of stuff just was like reinforcing that for me, where I was like, we need to be having some more, and I was like, you need to be talking to your children about whiteness. You know, I was like, I'm always like big upping that they're Filipina, right? But I was like, you need to be having some like conversations with them. I was like, I need you to do more work, right? And you know, to be fair, like this guy is like, compared to a lot of people, he's doing so much work. But even then I was like, it's not enough. Like, it's not enough in our home. Like, you need to direct, I feel like he has a lot of care energy that he puts out into the world. And I was like, you need to actually be putting some more of that like back into our home. And so I will say that that's like that's a thing that we're still working on. And we talk about it all the time.
Through my work, I work a lot with new moms, and something that comes up a lot is mom guilt. And I'm just wondering how how you think about mom guilt and how you deal with feeling that way at times.
I would love to hear your answer on this. We can both answer it, but I want to hear Jess.
Okay, well, I think it, gosh, I think it depends on the like variety of guilt. I have never felt guilty about working. I don't know why. I don't have that in me. Is it because my mom always worked? She went back to work when I was 3 weeks old and was like, whatever, just that variety of 80s mom, like, God bless her, like, had no idea. I was 3 weeks old. I turned out fine. So I always expected that I would work. My husband always expected I like, didn't have that. So, like, I can't speak to that. I think as I've gone on in my motherhood journey, my older daughter my older daughter is now 10, and the biggest thing that I do that helps is every time I feel a twinge of guilt, I think, is this because I actually feel guilty and like this is something I want to work on, or is it because it's some sort of outside pressure that is something I don't really care about? A sort of mundane example of this is like, I forgot to buy a white t-shirt for some special event that she had. It's like every damn week it is like some other thing that is buried at the bottom of an email that has 47 bullet points and I only read the first 46. And she was pissed. And I felt bad because I had disappointed her. That is a human emotion. You feel bad when you disappoint someone. But then I was like, is it reasonable to really feel that bad? I'm doing my best. I even read that email. It just was so far down. I can't retain all that information. So it's like, that sort of stuff is happening every single day. And so like every person is going to have their values, right? So it's like at the end of the day, it's remembering, it's like, what are your values? Not what are their values out there about what they think mother should be. Like, what is the thing that you think you should be? And that's not easy to determine. Again, I'm so much better at it now that I've been a mom for almost 10 years than I was when I had a 1-year-old, because you're still sort of figuring out what kind of, what your values are. I mean, and that is the essential, important task, I think, for us to do. And as parents, not just moms, it's like, what are our values and how do we want to transmit them to our children? So that seems like a very, airy, very, vaunted response to that question, but that's sort of like ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, I love where it just landed, because that's also, I mean, honestly, that's like what this book is. Mm. This is, it's me doing it. I mean, like, what do I value? What do I think? What do I want? And realizing, like, I thought I knew. It's like it's like pushing myself to think deeper. Yeah. And, like, it's like the work of being a person, right? Like, you get to a place, then you think you're, like, feeling good, and then you're like, oh, I have to do this every day. I have to, like, you know what I mean?
I do, and I think it's also your kids change so much. You change so much because you're growing older and becoming more seasoned, but it's also they change so much. Yeah. I mean, like, my 10-year-old is like a real person, man, and like I'm having to answer questions where I'm like, I'm not prepared to answer this question, and I'm 40. Yeah. So it's just like, it's constant evolution, and I think leaving space for that too. Yeah. Like, you're not going to know everything.
And I think, as far as guilt goes, like, I think it's always going to come. Like, we can do our best to, like, banish that, like, voice. But, like, we live in this culture where it's going to come. And so it's not exactly, like, the same as the anger issue. But, like, I'm, like, guilt comes and, like, I try to, like, that happened and I try to gently push it away. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to reject it. But sometimes it doesn't work to just be like, I'm just pretending it's not there or forcefully pushing it away. But it's like, okay, I feel guilty about that. What would happen if I tried to let it go? Mm-hmm. Like, maybe sometimes I'm actually able to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's also where it's like, sometimes I feel guilty because I should. Like, sometimes I'm like really irritable with my kids, and like, it's not great. I would love to work on that. Like, I'm gonna still be irritable with them sometimes, but I could be less irritable.
Yeah, I mean, also, I think it's not a zero-sum game. It's like, exactly. I read somewhere that you're not supposed to apologize to your kids, and then I was like,
no.
I was like, I don't think that's right. I was like, that doesn't seem right to me. Like, I apologize to them all the time. Not as in, like, please forgive me, here's a bowl of ice cream. But, like, it's like, yeah, sorry I yelled at you. I was, like, thinking about something else. It had nothing to do with you. Like, I feel like the other thing that we can do is like to just be the imperfect humans that we are,
Yeah,
and like talk to
totally.
them about it. And how, because that's also what they're doing when they're screaming at you, right? Like, we're actually not that different.
No, I deeply empathize. Like, my younger daughter, who's 5, comes home every day and just like takes her pants off. She just like comes through the door, she takes her pants off, and like sometimes she's just like super tired and hungry,
Yeah.
and she just like loses her mind. She takes her pants
Yeah.
off and loses her mind.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah,
I
that's
do
how
that.
I feel when I'm tired and hungry. Like, I very much empathize. I'm just not 5, so I can hold it together a little
Yes,
better.
yeah.
Not all the time, mostly. One more question.
One more question.
I have a question that's kind of about hope. Sometimes I feel sort of despondent about systemic change, which both of y'all's work is so tied to, and I wonder if either of you have a sense of sort of a longer vision or goals, or this is where we're going. You have that sense of momentum and continuity with, you know, feminism and people who are making change, or if it's just more existential for y'all, and you're just like, this is my work, this is what's meaningful to me, I'm living in the moment, and this is what I do.
I'll answer first, but you also have to answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so it depends on what day you catch me. I do think by the time that I shuffle off this mortal coil, many things will have moved forward. I'm very hopeful about that. What exactly they are, I don't know. Will the whole system, even become, Norway or whatever, Scandinavian country we're worshiping today? Like, no. I don't think the United States is going to do that in my lifetime, although, it would be nice if we had a bunch of those things. I think sort of on a day-to-day basis, like, without sounding too saccharine, just having conversations as a reporter and as a human being with other people just about their actual lives, sort of disconnected from politics and policy, which can just be so soul deadening and just a bummer. But every time I have a legitimate human connection around these issues, but also around a bunch of other things, even with people who I don't agree with, there is something sort of profound about that kind of connection and empathy that you can have on a sort of day-to-day basis and feel like, within a community, the other people who are also working on the project of raising children, and caring very deeply about that. Again, sort of disconnect. Like today, I'm starting to work on a story about a poll about the congressional races this fall. And when you're looking at statistics like that, national statistics, it is just so bloodless. And I'm sure all the people that they asked, again, even who I deeply disagree with, like, remembering at the end of the day that most of them just want what is best for their children desperately. I really do try to come back to that. I mean, some people are just horrible jerks. Like, they exist for sure, but I don't find despair to be productive, and so I try not to.
I get it. Like, it's very hard to maintain hope. I always think about, there's a writer and abolitionist named Mariam Kaba, and so she says that hope is a discipline, and that's the thing that I always tell myself. I think we're living through a very specific hellscape right now. It's bad, but people have been living through very terrible conditions for like most of humankind, right? So like I think about my ancestors, I think about people who were living through much harder things, and the reason why we're here is because they managed to stay alive and to not give up. And so I feel like if they didn't do that, then like, how could I? And that's really what it's a practice, you know what I mean? I think it is like, it's not, it's putting it in perspective. And
I read a lot of history. I mean, we're not out here dying of diphtheria.
Right.
Like, I feel every
we
time
have
I read,
running water.
Yeah.
You know, not everyone in the United States has running clean water, but
Yeah.
like we have that. You know what I mean? So I think that there's, just to put it in perspective, right? Like, I can't be paralyzed. I can't afford to give up hope. And it's also like I think about, just like Jess, like I identify so much with like I know the things that I want for this country are not going to happen while I'm alive. Not all of it, but like they might happen while my daughters are alive, and my daughters might be part of making that happen. And so I think that that's kind of just realizing, like for me, like hope is that I don't know, like everything we do is like. To go back to the beginning, it like reverberates through generations. Like what we do matters, right? It really does. Like someone might dig up our stories and what we were like, right? And someone might care to do that. And so I want to like be like we were here and we did these things, right? Like all of that stuff counts. And if we're not working to like make things a little bit better, just even a little bit better for a couple of people, like I don't know why we're here. That's all I have to say. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out here tonight. Thank you so much to Jess and Angela for this fantastic conversation, and thank you to everyone who asked such wonderful questions. Again, Angela will be signing and personalizing copies at the desk in the back. That door is also unlocked, so you can exit through there once you're done. We ask that you give her a minute to get settled, but then once she does so, that you please make your way back there so that our staff can start breaking down the space. We have incredibly enough sold out of our copies of Essential Labor. But we do have more copies of Angela's first book, Like a Mother, and Jess's novel, Soulmates, for purchase tonight, which they will both be signing as well.
Oh, also, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Jess has an amazing book coming out in December, and it's dealing with all of the things that we were talking about. So you should keep an eye out for that, and I think it's available.
You're the nicest, not for pre-order
Not
yet,
for pre-order
but
yet.
it's called Screaming on the Inside.
The unsustainability of American motherhood.
Yeah.
So just need to mention that.
Sorry, thank you. You're good.
Can I bring you with me as my hype woman? You're so much better at this than I am.
And lastly, for everyone who's tuned in on the YouTube live stream, you can still order a copy of Essential Labor through the link in the live stream description. All right, that's all. Thank you all so much again for coming out tonight, and let's give it up for